What's up folks, welcome to Wasted Space, and let's have a bit of a chat today about Space Engineers multiplayer. It's been out for a while now, Keen have had a chance to work on it, patch it a bit, we've had a chance to get used to it and get to grips with what exactly the new multiplayer looks like, obviously since the big overhaul they did back in July. And I thought it would be fun to now talk a bit about kind of the good, the bad and the ugly of what that is. Because there's definitely good there. I think this is one of the best patches to happen to Space Engineers, completely redefined what we thought we could do in the game. I mean, 28-man, 32-man servers is now something that sort of works. That's crazy. But it definitely has limitations, and there's definitely some things with it that are either a bit weird, or I really think should be changed to try and help the multiplayer kind of work better as a game mode. And at the end, we'll also have a bit of a chat about what I've learned from running PvP Survival, Armageddon, the Armco servers, about how to get around those limitations, how to design and run a fun multiplayer event or a fun multiplayer server that still works within those boundaries, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot and end up with a server a bit like PvP Survival that 3 weeks down the line isn't running very well and you can't do anything about it. But before that, this video has been kindly sponsored by Mastrop. So the guys over at Mastrop kindly offered to send me a set of the PC37Xs, which they've done in collaboration with Sennheiser, and being a bit of a fan of Sennheiser and also knowing a bit about this headset already, I snapped them up on the offer and have been using it for the last couple of weeks, getting to know the thing, see how comfortable it is, how it sounds and so on. And it seems like the hype is pretty warranted. This is a really nice headset. I'm going to start off by mentioning comfort, because for me that's almost more important than the sound quality. I wear glasses and this thing's got these lovely big ear cups that don't pressure the side of your head, don't sit on your ears at all. And they're made out of this velvet material, which means you don't get quite so sweaty when you're wearing them. And then when it comes to sound quality, they're open back headphones, which I love. It means that you don't sound like you've got two speakers just clamped to your heads. It's a much wider soundstage. They sound good in games, real clear positional audio. You can judge where people are, how far away they are, just like you'd expect. But they also sound really nice in music as well. They've got a really pleasant sound, not too overpowering in the bass like some headphones can be. So I really approve of that. And more related to this video, also has a pretty excellent microphone, as you can hear, that's adjustable, can be put into the upright position to mute it on the fly, and if you do some multiplayer, might just mean that you aren't the one everyone's shouting at to go push to talk. So if you are looking to replace your headset, guys, as you can see, I am not the only person that thinks this is a pretty great option. Have a look at the PC37X from Mastrop, there's a link down in the description, and thanks to Mastrop again for sending the headset over so I could check it out. So I'm going to try my best as we go through this to actually show you what I'm talking about, demonstrate on screen what I mean. But some of these are quite intangible and quite hard to do so hopefully the descriptions will do for those. And we're going to start off with one that's really easy to describe and almost impossible to work around or do anything about. You've just kind of got to deal with it. And that is something called sync distance. And this has a really big impact on multiplayer regardless of how you play. So sync distance is basically how far does a ship or an object, anything that isn't a beacon or like a celestial body like a planet or an asteroid, how far do they have to get away from you before the game decides it's not going to render them and not going to pay any attention to that object. And by default, the distance is 3 kilometers, which on a planet's fine. But in space is, as you can probably imagine, an absolute nightmare. It's been one of the biggest problems with the PvP Survival series, in that we have to get in the vastness of space within 3 kilometers of each other to be able to see each other. So that is a pretty big issue, and the unfortunate side of things is there's no easy workaround. Partly the reason for this is because on the local hosting side, so if you're just hosting the normal way, you boat up Space Engineers and you just host a multiplayer game through that, you don't even get an option to change the sync distance. You can change it, you can go to the SBC file, the sandbox.sbc file that has all the settings for your world in it and edit it in there, externally of Space Engineers, but only the dedicated server client will actually let you change it through the client itself. The big problem with this, of course, is it's down at 3K for a reason. And the more you put it up, the more load you're putting on the server to have to try and work this stuff out, especially if there's lots of ships near each other. Now, as far as how high can you go safely, my experience goes up to about 15,000 meters, so about 15K, beyond which things start to slow down noticeably. So you can turn it up a bit as long as your system's pretty good, but you're going to have to take into account the whole time that it doesn't matter how far you turn that setting up, you can't turn it high enough to make the distances in space really make much sense. And of course you combine that with the 100 meters a second speed limit in Space Engineers, And it makes the whole how do I find someone in space really, really difficult. So unfortunately, there's no real way around that. But given we're on the subject of PvP, let's deal with that one head on. Because honestly, PvP in Space Engineers just doesn't really work. Not in a natural environment outside of like an event with rules. Now, partly this is the sync distance thing and not being able to find people. In the 80 odd hours of PvP survival series, we've bumped into each other twice. And that's in a world where I've started introducing rules to try and push people together. It's only with the addition of actual events being run that we started meeting up and we started finding each other. But that's kind of the sync distance problem. The next problem comes when you do meet up and you run into Space Engineers' weapon balance and armor balance problem. And the problem there is basically one of the two turrets beats the other one very plainly. Gatlings are better than missiles when it comes to, if you put two ships in with the same amount of turrets, as long as those Gatlings are set to target missiles, the guy in the Gatling ship will win. Simply because not only does it shoot down the missiles, but the missiles really don't hit very often. I'm sure you guys are familiar, the AI is no good with them if it's shooting at a moving ship, and trying to actually lead them yourself, assuming you've got like static missile launchers instead, is really hard against anything that's moving. The projectile just simply doesn't travel fast enough. Add in the fact that the Gatlings will actively shoot them down as well, and you end up with a missile ship with no missile turrets on it and a Gatling ship flying around that, because of the armor problem that I'm going to get onto next, then can't win. Because anybody who's got any sense in a large ship just has a jump drive in the middle of it. And if you start losing a fight, what are you going to do? Jump out and immediately run into the sync distance problem, don't know where they've gone, can't finish them off. And the Gatlings just don't do enough damage to fulfill that role. Anybody who's awake and paying attention to their ship and has that jump drive in a sensible place is just going to be able to get out. The Gatlings will strip off the turrets and then struggle to get through the armor. Now, this does change a bit on small ships, but I'm kind of assuming that in a PvP scenario like this, your end game is the large ships. You start off with the small ships, you move into the large ships, because without shields or anything like that, as you guys all know, small ships kind of get shredded. It doesn't really matter what, the light armor on small ships, you just got to look at the stuff these days and it'll fall apart. The heavy armor obviously is a bit better, but it's also heavy armor and is far too heavy and just kills the handling on ships. That's why red team in the PvP is all using grav drives, because in order to use heavy armor, you kind of have to. But when it comes to the large ship side of things, the Gatling wins the fight and then can't kill the other team. And if you bring the missiles in, they're not going to hit anything or they're going to get shot down. And there's kind of no way out of that stalemate, as far as I can see, not using vanilla blocks. Obviously, people are going to suggest like player-made torpedoes and things like that. You guys also know that those kind of only work if you let them. And even then, there's problems with that side of things too. So there's no way to find people. When you do find people, assuming they're not like flying small ships and they have a jump drive, there's no real way of finishing them off, to the point where we've got to ramming and that still hasn't finished off anybody yet either. And then they can escape at will and you can't find them. So you end up in this scenario where you've got this constant exponential growth going on, which leads us straight into the problems with the conveyor system. So when it comes to these, they can nuke your server in a way that ignores even PCU limits. And you can stay within Keen's PCU limits and still make the server run like junk. And this is basically through the use of too many conveyor junctions, too many things that have got ports on them, lots of ports, rather than just using tubes. And there was an interesting rumor about why this was that explains very nicely exactly how the load's going, about why this has so much effect. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I will share it with you in the hope that it is, because it's kind of an interesting one. That is, back in the day, conveyor tubes used to be glass. And the rumor goes that we were at one point going to be able to see our items traveling through the network. Actually visually see each item, go through each conveyor tube, and be able to look at them that way. And it'd be quite visually interesting. The problem is, this means that every time they reach a junction where there's a choice as to where they can go, they have to reassess and work out which one of the tubes it's going to go down to render this item. Of course, we've now got opaque conveyors, and that's never going to happen. That's clearly been something that, if it ever was a thing, has been ditched. But it does tie very nicely into the explanation as to why these junctions cause so much load. Fortunately, there is a bit of a workaround for that, which is to simply try and chill out the use of conveyor junctions. And when you are using, like for example, stop using conveyor junctions as floors just because they're good structural blocks. That's why Spacebar put together the armoured conveyors for us, and it helps a lot from that perspective, and that's why a lot of people use conjunctions, is simply for structure. So maybe reassess how you're doing your designs. Maybe if you're hosting or playing with friends, let them know about this problem, because I promise you, that's 90% of the SimSpeed problems in itself come from these conveyor junction-based networks and how big they get and how complex they get. So the last one I want to mention before we move on to, okay, there's the limitations, how can we sort of work around those and have a really good multiplayer experience still, is to do with the cleanup tools, which is partly a please Keen do something more with this to help us server admins or whatever you want to call us out, and partly okay, just so you guys know to be careful with these tools, because the cleanup tools vary from the standard trash cleanup process where you've got a sort of distance from player, time since last logged out, and then a bunch of tick boxes for sort of powered and controlled and so on, which means that you have these weird scenarios where it won't remove a single reactor that's just floating through space, or a battery that's floating through space that's been detached from a ship because it's powered, but it will remove an in-progress ship that hasn't got power yet, that's just floating away because it's not controlled and it's not powered. So it's hugely broad strokes that can be quite dangerous. Or on the flip side, really, really specific stuff where you've got to nail down to just grid names without some of the tools that would help out with that, without some of the things like, there's a section in there for last time since logged out, owner last time since logged out, except that relies on the Space Engineer's ownership system. So I've had at least one scenario where there was a joint owned ship that was technically owned by one person, but also was being used and flown and actively worked on by another. He owned half the blocks, but because he wasn't the owner of whatever bit of the ship made it owned, it showed up as not being logged in for like 2.5 weeks. So I managed to delete a ship that was being actively flown because as far as Space Engineers was concerned, it hadn't been touched in 2.5 weeks. And on a big server, you can't go around relying on the auto tools to do stuff, but frequently there's so much stuff there that gets missed by the auto tools, and there's so much stuff there that just gets created by players that you can't get all of that manually either. There's so many little blocks just floating through space that for whatever reason the trash pickup hasn't quite got this time. So I think that's merely sort of an open request to try and make those trash removal tools and the cleanup tools a little bit more powerful, and at the same time say, guys, careful. If you're a server admin, you can really wind some people up with those. But also, if you're not a server admin and you're just playing with friends, I would really recommend turning them off completely and doing it manually. And actually going through the grid list and looking at everything one at a time. Because relying on the auto tools to do it, I promise you they'll either be missing tons of stuff or they'll be deleting stuff you don't want them to. So that leads me on to the end bit where I try and be positive, remind people that actually I still think Space Engineers multiplayer is a massive step forwards. Don't forget that. I know this has been a little critical, but that's hopefully how we get improvements. And talk about, okay, how do we work within these limitations to still have a lot of fun? What advice can I give for that? And I mean, start off with, this is probably the most obvious one of the lot, but keep it simple. And especially when you start upping the number of players. And by that, I mean, for example, are you really going to use airtightness? Does airtightness really matter to you? Because if it doesn't, don't have it on just for the sake of having it on. Same with things like tool shake. You know, NPCs, are you actually going to interact with them? If not, don't have them on until you are. There's no reason to slow the server down like that. In the same way, it's also worth remembering that if you just load the server up with mods, you're making the experience harder for everybody. People joining the servers, not so good. People running the server, you're having a harder time on your rig or whichever servers you've got running it. And you're also giving yourself a hard time just managing it. You know, if there's a mod conflict, how are you going to work that out? Mod orders do actually matter to some extent. There's a whole bunch of ways there where you can just give yourself a hard time. Add the mods as you need them and as you're going to use them, rather than that sort of dream scenario like, these are all the mods we're going to use for this server, and then half of them just never even get touched. Also, and this kind of ties in a bit with that, really enjoy and savour the start of the game. That first bit where you just spawned, you're in your land, or however you're starting the game, enjoy those early stages as much as you can. That's where the real gameplay and value is in Base Engineers at the moment. As soon as you get up to those big builds, as soon as you get to what you might describe as kind of the end game, that's where servers die. That's where you run into all of those problems with performance. That's where you start making massive miners that cause voxel issues. That's where kind of most of the issues lie. The more you enjoy the step and the approach to that, the more you enjoy the smaller ships, the more you sort of, even if it means artificially limiting yourself and saying, no, I'm going to build a rover and I'm going to spend some time driving around with wheels before I build something that can fly or something that can hover. Spend some time in that area and enjoy it, because that's the most fun bit of Space Engineers, where you've still got loads of goals, still got loads of things to do. And if you're finding that just doesn't really float your boat and it's not giving you what you want from Space Engineers, make it harder. A bit like we did with the Armageddon save. You want a challenge as a builder, start turning on some stuff that really does punish you. Start having those spiders on, and obviously use the fix mod. Start putting on meteors. That is a thing that none of us really use, except to some extent it's kind of fun and does stretch out that early bit and turn the game into something where, shock horror, you might actually fail. You might actually have to start again, which might not be perfect for some, but at least it gives some risk, it gives some enjoyment to that period in the game. And certainly that's where I think at the moment the real fun with Space Engineers lies, especially in sort of survival multiplayer. I'll also say as well, like, being creative with it, especially when it comes to sort of the savouring the early game side of things, can really help as well. I mean, there's keeping it simple, but then if you keep it simple by setting your save in an asteroid field, assuming you want to do PvP, for example, set it in an asteroid field that's quite small, keep it to small ships. That does change up how things play a lot, and in a way that might be a bit new to you, but also in a way that's going to keep the server load nice and low. That sort of thing. Try and set yourself scenarios and encounters, rather than, again, just pursue this idea of go for endgame, where honestly, all you're going to do is run out of things to do and run out of a server that can really run it all. Right, well, I think that's quite enough rambling from me, because I've been going on for ages. Apologies, guys. I just wanted to really, I've played a lot of multiplayer since that patch came out, and let's be clear, that patch was great. Really revitalised my interest in multiplayer, and I've never had so much fun as I've had since then, with these stupid games with loads of people in there, and it's actually running just leaps and bounds better than it used to. I'm just super conscious that we're not that far from Space Engineers release. Marek and KSH, they're pushing for that now. And so if we do want this stuff to improve, and we do want these final changes to get in there and really make multiplayer awesome, avoiding that phrase, then now's the time it's kind of got to happen. And some of these could be fixed. Some of them I think are more difficult than others, but it's certainly worth raising that discussion and talking a bit about the few flaws that still remain and the few ways it could still be improved. And at the same time, maybe help you guys out in understanding why it is that sometimes Space Engineers runs like it does, and why it is that sometimes you can't find anyone in multiplayer, for example. So hopefully this was vaguely interesting. I know I went on for ages, but it's a discussion I wanted to have. If you guys have got anything I've missed out, or you've got anything you wanted to add yourselves, or just ways in which you think it could be improved as well, hit me up down in the comments. I mean, hopefully keen to see this video and listen to some of this feedback and understand that it's criticism from a positive side of things, really wanting the game to be good. And maybe we can still have some of these and make a bit of a change before Space Engineers hits release. Either way, thanks for watching, guys. Hit like if you did enjoy this one. I'm sorry it was a bit of a long talking head, but it is what it is. Hit dislike if you didn't like the long talking head. And thanks, of course, to Massdrop again for sponsoring the video. We'll catch you guys for the next one.